Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about markets. Now, when it comes to markets in this whole section, or excuse me, this whole unit, one thing we want you to know is that it ask a lot of questions and understand that a lot of this is going to be practice based. So it might seem confusing to start, but you're going to understand that graph right there when we get done with this unit. So make sure we ask questions and get ready to do a lot of practice because a lot of people just flip the switch if you practice it enough times. Okay, so you have your factors of production. You have your land, your labor, and your capital. And every society needs to basically make some choices with those factors of production. Okay, producers, they ask the question: What do we produce? How do we produce it? When do we produce it? And where do we produce it? Okay, the consumers, of course, are basically who are these people that are going to consume the goods and services that are made with these factors of production. So, of course, the producers and the consumers are asking different questions, but they all act within their own issue of self-interest at this point. Okay, and so they're going to make choices regarding that self-interest, understanding that there's a cost to whatever choice they make, and realizing that they're probably going to behave differently when incentives are brought into the situation. Now, of course, we talked about incentives last time when we talked about this idea of price. Okay. Remember, a price is a signal wrapped in an incentive. It sends different signals to producers and consumers. 25 cents, 50 cents. Obviously, the consumer is going to want to buy at a cheaper price. The producer wants to sell at a higher price. But understand that we have one more rule that we haven't addressed here, and that's that rational people think at the margin. Okay. Consumers are going to be asking some questions whenever they see these, I want to buy lemons, goods and services. I want to buy lemons. So I'm not going to ask whether or not I'm going to buy the lemon. I'm going to ask, how many am I willing to buy at a certain price? And of course, at what price am I willing to pay to pull the trigger and actually do that? Now, obviously, in this situation, it's going to be the cheaper one. But the seller is also asking questions at the margin at this point. How many am I willing to make at a certain price? And at what price am I going to be willing to sell them at? These are all marginal issues. Obviously, the producer wants to sell at the more expensive price. And let's remember, what is a price? A price is a measurement of value. And of course, the cheaper it is, the more likely the incentive is for the consumer to purchase. The more expensive it is, the more incentive that more likely the seller is going to produce more. This is the concepts around a market. It's any arrangement that allows buyers and sellers to make any exchange. And that doesn't need to be like a building, like a store. People think a market is actually like a supermarket. No, a market is any arrangement where buyers and sellers make an exchange. It could be online, virtual, like NFTs. It could be services like mobile pet grooming or goods like a pizza. Okay. But any arrangement that allows buyers and sellers to make an exchange. And of course, they could be exchanging goods, they can be exchanging services, they could be exchanging factors of production, or they could be exchanging things that are illegal, like a black market. Black markets aren't necessarily dangerous, they're just goods or services that are actually illegal. But it's still a buyers and sellers making an exchange, even if it is illegal. So let's go back to price again. And how do we create a price? How is a price created? Well, this goes under the idea that profit is the motivator and competition is the regulator. So, what motivates a price to go up? Well, basically profit. And profit is what businesses get after they have paid their costs. So, it's any money they've gained after they've paid all their costs off. That motivates businesses to get the price as high as possible. But it's not going to be super high because of competition. And competition is essentially the struggle between producers for the dollars of a consumer. The struggle between producers for the dollar of a consumer. And that, you know, a company can put the price way up here, but there's going to be another company that's going to jump in and say, well, I think I can get more people to buy my product if I price my thing a little bit lower. So then the price is actually regulated. It's not going to be astronomical. It actually starts dropping down because competition being introduced in the market allows people to afford more stuff because, again, there's always going to be somebody out there that wants to charge a little bit less. So profit is the motivator, competition is the regulator. And of course, when we start talking about supply and demand, we're talking about demand side, the buyer or the consumer. The supply side is the seller or the producer. Okay. The two people here basically set the price. Ultimately, within a market, the buyer and the seller decide what the price is, but they have different goals. Okay. So, goal number one, the buyer wants everything for zero. I would like it for free. The seller wants everything for infinite, basically as high as possible. And obviously, seller's not going to get infinite price, buyer's not going to get a zero price. So what do? They meet in the middle and make a transaction. They make an agreed upon transaction at a certain price. And that price is known as equilibrium. It's the price at which the buyers and sellers agree. So the seller says, I'm offering it at this. The buyer says, cool, I'll take it. Boom, there we go. All right. Now, seller's happy, buyer's happy. Now, if you price something too high, then you're going to have too much of a product available. Buyers aren't going to buy it. This is called a surplus, when there's too much of a good or service available at too high a price. Buyer's unhappy. Okay. If you price something too low, that's called a shortage. Then the buyers are super happy. Wow, but you run out of it because the sellers aren't getting the maximum price. So they're not going to make as much. No, equilibrium is what we're looking for, where buyers and sellers are both happy. Buyers get what they want at the right price. Sellers sell what they want at the right price. A perfect market equilibrium. Now, this concept of profit is the motivator, competition is the regulator, came from Adam Smith, who developed the idea of the free market economy. What he said is you don't necessarily need a government to tell you everything about what to do with factors of production. Free markets will naturally create their own price because a buyer and a seller will agree, and they'll actually create their own regulations. You don't necessarily always need a government telling you what to do or telling you what is or is not safe or telling you how to use your factors of production efficiently. Businesses and consumers will do that on their own. Take, for instance, if I were to go on a plane to Morelia, Michoacan, and I plop down, I don't know any Spanish, I know nothing about the culture, nothing about the city, but I'm hungry. So where am I going to go? Do I need a government to tell me where to eat? No. I go to the food stalls and I look for the food stall that has the longest line. What is that signaling to me? Well, it signals to me that the food is probably good, the food is probably safe, the food is probably a reasonable price. How do I know that? Well, I know that because the line at the food stall is really long. Because if it wasn't long, if there weren't that many people there, that's a signal to me that the food is bad or too expensive somehow. So it's the free market, the buyer and seller without any interference actually working. And this is where kind of Adam Smith said, you don't need a lot of people telling you what to do. The buyer and the seller is going to do that by themselves, the invisible hand. So this is going to reward efficient producers and consumers that are well informed, that negotiate. It's going to result in goods society wants. Why? Because then why would a producer make something that the society doesn't want? In a quantity society wants, because the producer doesn't want to make too much. And of course, prices society is willing and able to pay. How do we know this? Because people will buy it. If it's too expensive, people will not buy it. And of course, normal profits. Now, some people like to debate over what does it mean for normal profits, but when it comes down to it, if like Amazon is huge for a reason. Amazon is huge because a lot of people use Amazon's services. Amazon wouldn't make any money if people didn't use them. So is their profit normal? A lot of people would argue, yeah, it's perfectly normal. Okay. Now, in the end, the question becomes who actually does decide the economic questions regarding the factors of production? What do we produce? How do we produce it? Where do we produce it? When do we produce it? And who will consume it? Should the government do it or the market, which is buyers and sellers? Okay? And this is the eternal struggle about, which one should make the choice of what to do with the factors of production. Now, some arguments are that free markets create very high prices and inequality, and that could be the case. For instance, healthcare. Healthcare in the United States is very expensive. Why is it? Well, number one, because there's a lot of demand for healthcare. Americans are obese. They have a lot there right now. There's the opioid epidemic. So, there's a lot of car crashes. All this creates the need and desire for the demand for healthcare. So on the free market side, yeah, the free market does drive up the price of healthcare, but government is also involved in healthcare on the supply side. For instance, doctors, which is your labor, you have to go through years and years and years of school and licensing. The United States law doesn't allow doctors from a lot of other countries to just come over and practice medicine. So there's a lot of restrictions on immigration. That would lower prices. You can't put clinics just anywhere, hospitals anywhere. There's actually land use laws and zones where you have to put clinics and medical care. You can't just plop it down in any neighborhood. So it's government telling you what to do with your resources. That keeps prices high. And of course, drugs. Drugs are very expensive. Drugs, of course, are capital, but you can't import drugs from other countries. If you imported drugs from other countries, that would be more competition. Profit's the motivator, but competition regulates it. But in the United States, laws prevent drugs from actually being imported into the country. So we don't want to ask, whether free markets or government making decisions are bad. Rational people think at the margin. Okay, it's not either or government or buyers and sellers. It should be how much should the government decide what happens to factors of production and how much should the individual choice, the market buyers and sellers decide what happens to those factors of production. Remember, rational people think at the margin.